That was my first thought as I stepped through the velvet-curtained entrance and into the dim, golden haze of the restaurant where William had proposed 15 years ago. Everything was the same: the deep leather booths, the flicker of candlelight on polished glassware, the way the waiters moved like shadows. It smelled like truffle oil, dry-aged beef, and something else. Something sharp and invisible. Like betrayal, maybe. He didn't see me right away. He was too busy swirling his wine, performing elegance for the woman across from him. Rebecca Harrington. Younger. Lipstick red as a wound. She laughed too loudly at something he said. The sound cracked through the hush of the room. I didn't walk over. Not yet. I stood behind a marble column and watched them for a moment. Observed the careful choreography of their seduction, the reach for his wrist, the practiced toss of her hair, the way he angled his body toward her like he was starving. He'd worn that smile before. On me. On our wedding night. At Emma's birth. At 1,000 hospital fundraisers when he'd held my hand and told strangers I couldn't have done it without her. What a masterpiece he was. A man who could save a life before lunch and ruin one before dinner. I stepped into the light. He noticed me first. The color drained from his face so subtly it might have gone unnoticed by anyone who hadn't memorized every muscle beneath his skin. Rebecca turned, her smile faltering into something brittle. Her eyes moved over me with recognition and something else: curiosity? Fear? It didn't matter. I approached slowly, like it was any ordinary dinner. Like I wasn't holding the jagged edge of a blade tucked behind my teeth. Jennifer, William said, voice smooth as ever. This is unexpected. I know, I replied, placing a small cream envelope on the table between them. But you'll want to open that. He blinked. Rebecca reached for her glass. Neither moved to touch the envelope. Go ahead, I said, my voice gentle, almost maternal. It's not poisoned. Just paper. Ink. Truth. He opened it. The air shifted. Changed. His hands trembled as he read the DNA results. The illusion cracked, slowly at first, then all at once. William looked up, eyes wild. This isn't possible. Rebecca leaned in, reading over his shoulder. Her expression splintered. What is this? The truth, I said. 15 years late. I didn't wait for questions. Didn't offer explanations. I turned and left, the silence behind me more complete than any door slam or scream could have achieved. 36 hours earlier, I was still pretending to be the woman who didn't know. Still cooking for 3 children. Still answering texts from a man I now understood was capable of almost surgical cruelty. Still smiling at teachers and dry cleaners and neighbors who thought they knew the shape of my life. The facade was almost beautiful in a tragic sort of way. I'd found the envelope 2 weeks ago. Not the DNA report, that came later. No, the first envelope was light blue, pressed into the mailbox without a stamp. Inside was a photograph. William and Rebecca. Laughing. Her fingers threaded through his at the hospital gala. His mouth near her ear. I didn't cry. Not then. Not anymore. Instead, I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and stared at it on the counter. That's when it hit me, not the affair. I'd already known. The lies no longer surprised me. What hit me was the memory. The walk-in closet. The shirt. The lipstick. Not red like a cherry. Red like arterial blood. The timeline didn't add up. The shirt had been in the wrong bag. And the night it was stained, William had told me he'd been in surgery. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not broke. Broke is sudden. This was slower. A quiet unraveling. The stitch of my last illusion coming undone. I didn't go looking for revenge. Not right away. First, I just needed to understand. At night, I sat in the dark and asked myself questions I couldn't stop hearing. Why did he want a divorce now? Why wasn't he fighting for the children? Why was he draining our joint savings when he made 10 times what I did? Why did the twins have brown eyes when neither of us did? The last one was the most dangerous. Because I had answers. I just hadn't wanted to believe them. The next morning, I opened the home safe. It was organized the way William liked everything: alphabetized folders, color-coded tabs, records going back to the day we were married. I went through them methodically, the way he'd taught me to organize surgical notes when he was still a resident. At first, nothing jumped out. But then came the deposits: $7, $500, $5,200, $10,000, wired monthly to something called Riverside Holdings LLC. That wasn't ours. That wasn't mine. I took a picture. Then another. Then I called Patricia Winters. She was the kind of divorce attorney you only heard about in bitter whispers: expensive, brutal, absolutely merciless. I handed her the photos like I was placing a loaded gun on the table. "Start digging," I told her. "And I want full custody." She looked at me, calculating. "Are you sure you want a war, Mrs. Carter?" "I'm sure I want the truth." The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. Patricia called me late one night. "You ever hear of a Dr. Nathan Brooks?" The name lit something dim in the back of my memory. Glasses. Quiet. Always looked like he wanted to disappear at fundraisers. "He worked with your husband. Left Ashford Medical Center 3 years ago." Quietly. "Might be worth a conversation." It took 5 voicemails to get a call back. "I've been waiting for this call for years," he said without preamble. "We should talk in person." We met at a gas station diner an hour outside the city. The kind of place with bad coffee and better secrets. Nathan looked like a man who'd aged a decade in half the time. He didn't bother with small talk. "Jennifer," he said, "you don't know what you're walking into. Tell me anyway." And he did. He told me about Ashford's fertility clinic. About false records. Switched specimens. Artificially inflated success rates. A director with too much ambition. A doctor willing to do anything to avoid passing on a hereditary heart condition. That doctor was William. He didn't just cheat on me. He edited our children's DNA. He replaced his own sperm during our IVF treatments. Knew what he was doing. Signed off on it. Erased the chance of his children inheriting his defective heart. Replaced that chance with a lie. I left the diner with a thumb drive in my purse and a storm where my soul used to be. Now I was here. Back at Vincenzo's. Back in the costume of Jennifer Carter, surgeon's wife. But the seams were splitting. The script was burning. William thought I was still reading from the lines he'd written for me. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Tomorrow, I would dismantle everything. Scene by scene. Truth by truth. And when I was finished, there'd be nothing left of his perfect little life but ash and a story. A story I was finally ready to tell. There's a sound that lives in your bones when your reality begins to unspool. It isn't a scream or a sob or a crash. It's silence, so deep it hums. That silence had followed me home from the diner, curled up beside me in bed, and slipped between the cracks of my voice when I told the kids Daddy would be working late, again. The morning after my meeting with Dr. Brooks, I stood barefoot on the cold kitchen tiles, staring at my reflection in the sliding glass door. I looked the same. Still Jennifer Carter. Still the smiling PTA coordinator. Still the woman who made lemon squares for bake sales and birthday cupcakes with piped icing. But inside, something tectonic had shifted. I turned back to the table, where the thumb drive Nathan had given me waited like a weapon. I didn't open it right away. I needed to see the children first, to remind myself of what was real. Emma was coloring at the breakfast bar, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. She'd always been more intense than the twins, more self-contained. I knelt beside her, brushed a strand of dark hair from her cheek, and stared just a little too long. She had William's jawline. Or did she? It struck me how fragile resemblance was. A trick of light. A suggestion of symmetry. And now I couldn't trust my own memory. Had I ever really compared them to him? Or had I just seen what I wanted to see, what I was told to believe? That night, I opened the thumb drive. There were dozens of files. Scanned lab reports, authorization forms, internal memos. It was meticulous. Nathan had clearly prepared for the day someone would finally ask for the truth. The smoking gun came buried in a folder titled Case 147V Carter. My hands shook as I opened it. There, in cold medical print, were the records from our IVF rounds. 5 cycles. 3 embryos implanted. 2 successful births. And in every record, William's signature appeared next to a procedural override. Specimen substitution due to hereditary concern, Carter, W. Authorization for anonymous donor sperm, approved. No donor ID. No notation of consent from the mother. No warning. Just quiet signatures on quiet forms and a stolen truth that now lived inside 3 unsuspecting children. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I did what I always did when something broke. I cleaned. By midnight, the kitchen gleamed. Every countertop wiped down, every drawer organized. I scrubbed the backsplash until the tile grout turned white again. It felt important to fix the visible while the invisible devoured everything else. The next day, I called Patricia. "You need to hear this," I said, and I played her the audio file Nathan had recorded of his last confrontation with the clinic director. It wasn't just about us. It was systemic. Funded. Protected. When the audio ended, there was a pause. "This changes everything," she said. We met in her office that afternoon. I handed her a folder of printed documents and told her everything. About William's condition. About the fertility fraud. About the children. "I want to bury him," I said. My voice was soft, but it vibrated with something new. Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me. "You know this will get ugly," she said. "I'm counting on it." That night, William came home late. I'd made dinner, coq au vin, his favorite. The smell filled the house, warm and nostalgic. He looked surprised. "Is it our anniversary?" he asked with a smirk. "No," I said, pouring his wine. "Just felt like cooking." He talked about the hospital while we ate. A new hire in cardiac, a board review coming up. He spoke as if everything were normal, as if he hadn't detonated the foundation of our life and moved on without bothering to look back. "Rebecca's joining the research committee," he said casually, as if I didn't know who she was. "She's bright. Ambitious." I nodded, smiled. He had no idea I knew. And that was my advantage. Over the next few days, I crafted the illusion of acceptance. I played the part of the sad but dignified wife, gracious, cooperative, heartbreak visible just enough to seem convincing. When he suggested we move the divorce along to protect the kids, I agreed. When he proposed alternating weekends and a 70/30 custody split, I pretended to consider it. When his lawyer sent a settlement offer so low it was practically offensive, I smiled and told Patricia to let it sit. The more compliant I acted, the more confident he became. I watched him bask in it. Watched him introduce Rebecca to our friends, our children, our world. She came to the twins' soccer game wearing my old North Face jacket, sitting in the same folding chair I'd taken to every practice for 5 years. I said nothing, just offered her hot chocolate. She declined. Smart girl. But William wasn't the only one I was watching. Rebecca was a mystery, a woman who had knowingly involved herself with a married man and inserted herself into a family with calculated grace. But there was something brittle about her, like porcelain that had been glued back together too many times. So I did what William had done to me. I hired a private investigator. 2 weeks later, I had the file. Rebecca Harrington was not just a woman with ambition and a sharp jawline. She was the daughter of Melline Harrington, one of William's surgical patients 5 years ago. The one who died unexpectedly during what should have been a routine valve replacement. The hospital had cleared William of any wrongdoing. Claimed the patient had failed to disclose a medication that complicated the surgery. The case was sealed. Buried. But Rebecca had been 22 when her mother died. She dropped out of her pre-med program that year. Disappeared from social media. Changed her last name. And 3 years later, she showed up as William's junior colleague. I stared at her file for a long time. This wasn't infatuation. This was revenge. That night, I left the second envelope on William's desk. This one contained nothing but a photo, Rebecca's college ID, her birth certificate, and a death certificate for Melline Harrington. I waited for his reaction. It came the next morning. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, the envelope in hand. What the hell is this? I looked up from packing Emma's lunch. What does it look like? You're having me followed now? I'm not the one who should be worried. He didn't reply. His hand clenched around the envelope. Be careful, Jennifer. I am, I said. More than ever. There's a stillness that comes just before the storm breaks. A pause where the world seems to hold its breath. I was in that space now, floating inside it, gathering my weapons, stitching my armor. Soon, the world would know. About William. About the clinic. About the fraud, the manipulation, the stolen choice. The children he claimed but never fathered. The women he lied to. The lives he altered for the sake of ambition. Soon, the perfect life he curated would fall apart. Not with rage, but with precision. Scene by scene. Truth by truth. And I would be there, every moment of it, watching the man who erased my reality finally lose his. The day the test results arrived, the air felt unusually still. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because the twins had a half day at school, and Emma had begged to skip her piano lesson. She said she wasn't feeling well, and I believed her. Something about the day felt off, like the universe was holding its breath. The email came at 9:42 a.m. Subject line, DNA testing results. Confidential. I stared at the unopened message for 12 minutes, fingers hovering, chest tight. I already knew what it would say. But knowing isn't the same as seeing. I clicked. The alleged father is excluded as the biological parent of the tested children. The probability of paternity is 0%. There was no drama in the words. No commentary. Just clean, clinical finality. Like someone quietly turning out the lights on 15 years of certainty. I printed the report. Then, for the first time since this began, I wept. Not the delicate kind of weeping they show in films, where tears fall like pearls onto porcelain skin. No. I crumpled to the kitchen floor and let it all come loose. Grief, yes. But also rage. Loss. Horror. The memory of tiny pink hats in the NICU. Of lullabies sung at 3 a.m. Of scraped knees and school projects and the first time Emma said, "You're the best mom in the world." All of it, every treasured moment, had taken root in a lie. Not a mistake. Not a mix-up. A lie. William had looked into our children's eyes, year after year, birthday after birthday, and allowed me to believe they carried his blood. His history. His name. But they didn't. When the sobs finally slowed, I sat upright against the kitchen cabinet, tasting salt on my lips, sweat on my collarbone. The envelope lay beside me like a quiet little bomb. I slid it into my purse and picked up the phone. Agent Michael Dawson didn't speak right away when I told him. I think he was giving me space to breathe. This isn't just medical fraud anymore, he said finally. It's reproductive coercion. Bioethical malpractice. If this goes to trial, it is going to trial, I said. He nodded, even though we weren't on video. Then we'll need more. A pattern. Witnesses. Evidence that ties William directly to the decisions. I have his signature, I said. On 5 forms. We'll need 20. That night, after the kids were asleep, I emailed Dr. Brooks and told him I was ready. Within hours, he sent me a list, couples who had undergone IVF at Ashford Medical Center during William's tenure. Names, dates, outcomes. A quiet history of dreams fulfilled or manipulated. 27 families. I made calls. The first 4 never responded. The next 3 politely declined. I just can't, one woman whispered before hanging up. A man told me I'd rather not know. But then came the Millers. She answered the door with twin boys standing behind her, boys with bright red hair and pale gray eyes. She had neither. She didn't ask how I got her name. She just stepped aside and said, "Come in." Over the next 2 weeks, I met with 5 families. The stories varied, some suspected, some had long buried the question, but they all shared a common thread: William's name. Dr. Carter personally oversaw our case. He said we had a rare incompatibility issue. He assured us anonymity was safest. Some of them cried. Some of them were angry. Some refused to pursue legal action, afraid of what it might do to their children. But they gave me their statements. Some gave documents. And a few, like me, decided to order DNA tests. We were bound together now, not by blood, but by betrayal. The twist came on a Friday. I was at the courthouse with Patricia, filing a motion to protect my children's legal status as heirs, when my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I answered. Mrs. Carter? Yes. This is Diane Fletcher. I used to work with your husband. At Ashford. I stopped breathing. I kept records, she said. They thought I destroyed them when I left. But I didn't. Diane lived in a cluttered apartment on the east edge of town, with cats and stacks of papers that towered like columns in a ruined temple. She wore orthopedic shoes and smelled faintly of lavender and regret. I'm not doing this for revenge, she said. I'm doing it because no one listened before. Maybe they will now. She opened a drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal. Inside were years of handwritten notes, names, dates, procedural alterations. Each entry ended the same way. Authorization. Drive W. Carter. Why didn't you go public before? I asked. I tried, she said, her smile bitter. They shut it down. Every time. Hospital legal. Ethics board. Police. Your husband has friends in places that don't like scandals. She handed me a business card. Michael Dawson, Medical Ethics Investigation Unit, already working with him, I said. She smiled. Then let's finish what we started. I left her apartment with a stack of photocopies and the journal in my bag. I also left with something else. Something deeper. A sense of scope. William hadn't just lied to me. He hadn't just manipulated my body, my children, my life. He'd systematically rewritten dozens of lives. For profit. For reputation. For control. He wasn't just a bad husband. He was a man who thought ethics were optional, who thought consequences didn't apply to men with white coats and steady hands. That weekend, I didn't sleep much. I watched my children as they slept. I studied their faces, not for resemblance anymore, but for innocence. And I found it. In every breath. In every sigh. They were mine. Entirely. That would never change. The next twist came from Rebecca. She showed up at my house. It was late. Maybe 11 p.m. I'd just finished emailing Dawson the last of the scanned documents. There was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw her, no makeup, hair in a loose braid, hands shaking. I opened it. She didn't speak right away. Then, I didn't know. I crossed my arms. About the children? She nodded. I thought he'd left you because he wasn't in love anymore. I didn't know he'd designed them. I said. The word tasted like acid. She flinched. He said you wanted to keep the donor anonymous. That it was your idea. That you were grateful. A laugh escaped me, cold, sharp. He's been rewriting my story for years. Why stop now? She looked away. I loved him, she said. But now I don't even know who I was in love with. You were in love with the version he showed you, I said. Same as I was. We stood there in silence. Finally, she said, if you need me. I'll testify. I nodded. Then shut the door. The next morning, I received an email from Ashford Medical Center. It was an invitation. William was being awarded Physician of the Year. Keynote speaker. Gala to be held at the Corinthian Hotel. Of course. He still thought he was untouchable. He didn't know about the journal. The recordings. The DNA test. He didn't know that the room would be full of people waiting to watch him fall. I looked at the invitation, then slid it into the drawer beside the DNA results. Everything was lining up. All that was left now was the reveal. Vincenzo's called to confirm the reservation under William Carter at 7:30 p.m. table for 2. Corner booth. The same one where he'd asked me to marry him 15 years ago. The same one he now intended to use for a post-gala celebration with Rebecca. I thanked the hostess, told her we'd all be attending. I hung up and stared at the cream-colored envelope lying on my desk. Inside was the final version of the DNA report. Crisp, clinical, bulletproof. I'd had it reprinted on Ashford Medical Center letterhead, taken from William's own home office. Let him choke on the branding. That afternoon, the board had met behind closed doors. A special ethics committee assembled by the hospital's legal counsel. Agent Dawson and I watched from a side chamber, two ghosts on the wall of William's shining career. Dawson presented everything. The IVF records, the donor substitutions, the financial kickbacks, the falsified documentation Diane Fletcher had preserved in her quiet apartment. He ended with a video, grainy but clear. William's voice, "They're my children." Of course I had them tested. I needed to be sure they didn't carry the gene. What gene? Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It runs in my family. Without telling their mother? I'm their father and a surgeon. I made a medical call. The board members didn't move for a long time. Then Dr. Helena Winters, chair of surgery, looked up and said simply, "We need to prepare a statement." The gala would proceed as planned, but with a very different ending. Back home, I laid out my black dress. Silk. Sharp. Elegant. The kind Rebecca once mocked as suburban sophistication. It fit better than I remembered. Or maybe I had changed. I clipped in the diamond earrings William gave me for our 10th anniversary. A gift bought on the same credit card he used to pay for a hotel room in Boston 2 nights earlier, with her. I didn't wear them for him. I wore them because I wanted him to see me fully for the first and last time. The children were at my sister's for the weekend. They thought Mommy was going to a party. I kissed them both extra long when I dropped them off. Emma clung a little harder than usual. "Will Daddy be there?" she'd asked softly. "Yes," I said. But it's not his kind of party. I arrived early to the Corinthian Hotel. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and wine glasses too delicate for clumsy hands. Doctors in tuxedos and gowns stood in curated clusters, the air thick with ego and champagne. William was already there, holding court near the stage. Rebecca stood beside him, radiant in crimson. Her dress hugged her like blood. She played her role well, smiling, laughing at the right moments, touching his wrist like she belonged. They didn't see me at first. I preferred it that way. I made my way through the room slowly, absorbing it all. The tension in the air. The practiced civility. The performance of perfection. How many of them knew already? How many had been told in whispers? How many would pretend surprise when the fall came? I passed Margaret Reynolds, wife of the chief of surgery. "So brave of you to come tonight," she said in a hush. I smiled. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The MC took the stage just after 8:15. He gave the usual pleasantries. Introduced the hospital board. Praised Ashford's continued excellence in ethical care. Then he invited Dr. William Carter to accept the award for Physician of the Year. Thunderous applause filled the room. William climbed the stage steps with a calm confidence only truly dangerous men possess. His tuxedo crisp. His speech practiced. He held the crystal trophy like it was forged from his own spine. Medicine, he began, isn't just science. It's trust. Between patient and doctor. Between truth and responsibility. We hold lives in our hands, and we must do so with reverence. I didn't blink. I watched Rebecca. Her smile had faltered slightly. Her hands clasped too tightly. Maybe she sensed it. Maybe she always had. William closed his speech with a quote from Hippocrates. "Wherever the art of medicine is loved, there is also a love of humanity." The applause swelled again. He didn't know it was the last time. I waited near the coat check, letting him think he'd won the evening. He and Rebecca left just after 9 o'clock, heading toward Vincenzo's. I followed 20 minutes later. The envelope in my purse felt like a live wire. The maitre d' greeted me with a gentle bow. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "So wonderful to see you again. Dr. Carter mentioned you might be joining them." Of course he had. Probably wanted me to see it. One last power play. One final humiliation. Perfect. They were already seated at our old table. The one by the window. The one where we'd once ordered the 1982 Bordeaux to celebrate his first successful solo procedure. He'd ordered it again tonight. It sat between them, a half-drunk. William looked up first. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by smug delight. "Jennifer," he said, rising. "This is unexpected." Rebecca turned. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw it. Recognition. I smiled softly. "Mind if I join you?" William gestured to the waiter without looking. "Of course. We have more than enough wine." I sat across from them, pulled the envelope from my purse, and set it on the table like a bomb with no countdown. "What's this?" he asked. "An ending," I said. He opened it. Rebecca leaned in. And the world changed. His expression shifted in real-time confusion, then disbelief, then horror. The facade cracked. His fingers trembled. "What is this?" Rebecca asked sharply. William didn't answer. So I did. "It's the DNA test. William isn't the biological father of any of our children." Silence swallowed the table. Rebecca looked from me to him. "Is this true?" William shook his head, but too slowly. "You told me she knew," she said. "You said it was her choice." She didn't choose," I cut in. "He did. Quietly. Illegally. Repeatedly." She pushed back from the table. Her breath came short. The color drained from her face. William reached for her wrist. "Rebecca, don't," she whispered. I looked up as Dr. Helena Winters entered the restaurant, flanked by 2 hospital board members and Agent Dawson. They moved with quiet authority. Customers turned. Waitstaff froze. William's voice rose. "What the hell is this?" Dawson stepped forward. "Dr. William Carter, you are under arrest for medical fraud, obstruction of ethics investigations, financial misconduct, and reproductive coercion." He reached into his coat and produced the handcuffs. William stood abruptly. "This is a setup." "She's vindictive, she's making this up." Rebecca stared at him, whispering, "You killed my mother." His mouth opened, then shut. Dawson stepped in. "Hands behind your back." And just like that, William Carter, surgeon, father, liar, was undone. The room went still. As the officers led him away, he looked back at me. Fury. Confusion. Something else, too. Fear. 15 years, he spat. "You've been planning this?" I stood slowly. Picked up the wine glass. Toasted him. "No," I said. "You spent 15 years lying. I only needed 3 months to tear it down." Rebecca remained seated after they dragged him away. Her hands cupped her face. Her shoulders shook. "I didn't know," she said, voice thin. "I believe you," I said. "But now you do." She looked up. "What happens next?" I placed the envelope back into my purse. "Everything," I said. "Everything happens next." 3 days after the arrest, William's face was everywhere. Not on a surgical billboard or a gala brochure this time, but on cable news. Online headlines. Talk shows and podcasts. Renowned surgeon arrested in fertility fraud scandal. Dr. William Carter accused of reproductive coercion. How one woman brought down a medical empire. They used that word, empire, like it was a compliment. It wasn't. Empires collapse. And I was the one who lit the match. The fallout was immediate. Ashford Medical Center suspended his license before dawn the next morning. By noon, the clinic's website was offline. By dinner, I was fielding calls from families I'd never met. Women with haunted voices, men stammering through disbelief, children asking questions their parents couldn't answer. The lie was too big now to be quiet. In the middle of all that noise, I sat at my kitchen table with Emma's watercolor painting drying beside me. A blob of purple and gold meant to be a tree. There were specks of glitter stuck to my wrist. I hadn't cried since the restaurant. Not when the media showed up. Not when William's attorney filed an emergency petition for bail. Not when my name began trending next to his. But there, in the stillness of that kitchen, watching glitter shimmer in lamplight, I broke again. Because I remembered Emma's voice the night before, "Mommy, do I look like Daddy?" And I had said, with unbearable honesty, "You look like you." That's better. Agent Dawson called that evening. "Jennifer," he said, voice heavy. "The DA wants you to testify." I assumed, I replied. "You don't have to if it becomes too much." I stared at the photo on the fridge, our family, frozen in time on a beach in Maui. The twins covered in sand. William's arm around me. All of us sun-drunk and smiling. It had felt real then. That's what made it dangerous. "I'll testify," I said. "He took away my children's right to know who they are. He doesn't get to keep his silence." The courthouse felt colder than it should have. Even in August. The walls seemed to hum with held breath. Reporters milled outside like carrion birds waiting for a fresh carcass. I wore black again. A different dress. This one higher at the neck, tighter at the sleeves. A shield made of silk. When I entered the courtroom, William didn't look up. He was seated at the defendant's table, flanked by lawyers who whispered without moving their lips. His hair was thinner. Shoulders slightly hunched. He looked like a man who knew he'd been caught, but hadn't yet realized the full weight of the fall. Rebecca wasn't there. She'd given her statement privately. Sealed. But I saw the bruise of her absence on his face like a shadow. When the judge called my name, I stood and walked to the witness stand like it was a stage built from every lie I'd lived inside. The prosecutor began gently. "State your name for the court, please." "Jennifer Carter." "Are you the legal spouse of Dr. William Carter?" "Yes." "How long were you married?" 15 years. "Do you have children?" "I do. 3. "And are they biologically—" "No," I interrupted. "They are not biologically his." Silence. I turned to the jury. "They are mine. Completely. In every way that counts." I testified for 4 hours. I told them about the walk-in closet, the lipstick, the emergency surgeries that weren't emergencies, the DNA test. I told them about the fertility clinic, the anonymous donors, the altered records. I told them how I'd built my life around a lie I wasn't given the dignity to consent to. And then I looked at William. He stared at the table. "I wasn't angry at first," I said, voice trembling. "Not even when I found out about Rebecca. Or the money. Or the fake LLC. I was just hollow. I'd given him everything. Time. Body. Trust. But what he took, I paused. My choice. My motherhood. He turned my body into a contract I never signed." The courtroom was quiet when I stepped down. Even the reporters stopped scribbling. I walked past William slowly. He didn't meet my eyes. After court, I stopped by my sister's to pick up the kids. The twins had made posters for me, #JusticeForMom, scribbled in bold crayon strokes. Emma had baked cookies with too much cinnamon. We sat on the porch and I told them a story. Not the legal one. Not the medical one. But the real one. "I wanted you more than anything," I said. "You are not an accident. You're not a lab mistake. You're not a lie. You're mine. Fully. Fiercely. Forever." That night, I lit a fire in the backyard. And burned the beach photo. Not out of hate. Not for revenge. But to make space. I watched the flames curl around his smile until there was nothing left of him. Only us. Only what comes next. 2 days later, a courier arrived. A final envelope. From William. Inside, 1 page. They were still my children. No signature. No apology. Just that. I held it for a moment. Then folded it. And fed it to the fire. In his absence, the world kept moving. The school held their fall recital. Emma played piano, her fingers trembling until she found her rhythm. I sat in the front row alone. When she finished, I stood and clapped until my hands ached. The hospital announced a new ethics board. Dr. Brooks had accepted the role of chair. He asked if I'd serve on the advisory committee. I agreed. The hardest moment came quietly. No lawyers. No cameras. Just bedtime. Emma stood at my doorway with tear-stained cheeks. "Mommy, will I ever meet him again?" I knelt, held her close. "You might," I whispered. "But not like before. Not as your father. Just as a man who made choices. Do I still get to love him?" The question cut deeper than any courtroom testimony. "Of course," I said. "Love isn't a reward. Or a punishment. It just is." She nodded, then crawled into bed. And I sat beside her until the sky turned lavender. That night, I stood in the bathroom, looking at my reflection. No mascara. No dress. No armor. Just me. And I realized something strange. I wasn't ruined. I was rewritten. Not as Jennifer Carter, wife of a surgeon, but as something sharper. Something softer. Someone free. 6 months after the trial, the first snow dusted the hedges along Oakwood Avenue like powdered sugar. It was late November, and the air held that hush just before the holidays, a stillness that reminded me of the silence that comes after someone you love walks out the door, and the world doesn't stop turning. But this time, the silence didn't ache. It made space. Space for breath. For healing. For something resembling peace. I stood at the front of the community center auditorium, fingers curled around a note card I wouldn't need. Behind me, a slideshow displayed old photographs of Ashford Medical Center, grainy black and whites of the early surgical suites, and smiling faces of staff long gone. The hospital was relaunching their reproductive care unit under new leadership. And I, Jennifer Carter, had been invited to give the keynote. Not as the surgeon's wife. Not as the scandal's survivor. But as a voice. A mother. A witness. A woman who refused to let silence be her inheritance. The lights dimmed slightly. I began. "There's a myth we tell women, one they begin hearing early and never stop carrying, that if you're good, if you're loyal, if you give everything, you'll be safe. Protected. Loved." I believed that myth. I believed that sacrifice equaled security. That being the good wife, the constant mother, the perfect supporter, would build a life I could trust. I paused. And for a while, it did. Or so I thought. Until the life I built turned out to be architecture over quicksand. A performance. A biography written by someone else. Soft murmurs passed through the crowd. But what I learned, and what I want every woman to hear, is this. Truth is not a threat. Silence is. And you're allowed to ask questions about the foundations of your own life. Afterward, people lined up to speak with me. Nurses. Residents. Women who looked like me 10 years ago, eyes too wide and tired. They didn't ask for advice. They just wanted to say, "I see you." And I'm starting to see myself. I went home that night not glowing, but grounded. There's a difference. The children adapted more quickly than I expected. Maybe because the truth, when offered gently, without shame, has a way of settling into young hearts with less friction than it does in adult ones. The boys never asked again if they looked like him. They began to say things like, "I look like Mommy when I'm mad," or "I got my laugh from Auntie Rachel." Emma, more sensitive, took longer. But one night in early spring, as we watched the stars from her bedroom window, she whispered, "You're my real parent. The only one that feels real." I didn't correct her. She already understood something many adults never will. William took a plea deal in exchange for a full confession and testimony against Dr. Mercer and others still under investigation. He'll never practice medicine again. He may not see the inside of a prison cell for long, but his reputation is gone. He will be remembered not for the lives he saved, but for the lives he rewrote. He asked to see the children once. Through lawyers. I declined. They'll have the right to choose when they're older. But they'll make that decision with open eyes. I still pass the old hospital sometimes, on my way to the school or the grocery store. Its facade looks unchanged, white columns, polished glass, too clean to tell the truth. But something has changed. People whisper differently now. Not about the scandal, but about accountability. About informed consent. About truth as policy, not just principle. In the break room, I imagine nurses no longer stay silent when something feels wrong. Maybe doctors double-check before signing away someone's parenthood. Maybe someone else's Jennifer never has to live this story. Rebecca moved away. She sent a card in late July, no return address. Inside, one sentence, handwritten in tight cursive, some revenge unspools into healing. I hope you find the kind that sticks. I didn't respond, but I folded it carefully and kept it in the same drawer where I keep my children's birth certificates and their first teeth. Dr. Brooks still emails. He's building out the ethical review board, and we meet quarterly to discuss new patient protections. Sometimes we argue about language. He prefers clinical clarity. I push for emotional transparency. It's become our rhythm. And somewhere in the rhythm, we've found a kind of friendship that doesn't ask for anything more than presence. A slow, quiet companionship. It feels honest. One morning in early October, I woke up and didn't think about William. Not once. Not as I brushed my teeth. Not as I packed school lunches. Not even as I tied Emma's shoes or told the boys to stop bickering over socks. He wasn't there. Not in my chest. Not in my throat. Not in the corners of my day like a stain I couldn't scrub out. And that more than the trial, more than the applause, more than the silence after the restaurant, that was the moment I realized I was free. That night, I took out an old journal I hadn't touched since the year after our honeymoon. I flipped past pages of grocery lists and family budgets and quotes I'd written down to keep myself inspired. Then, on a fresh page, I wrote, "This is the life I chose." Not the one I was given. Not the one I was told to want. Not the one I inherited out of obligation or silence. This is mine. Finally. Outside, the first real snow began to fall. I turned off the lights and let it cover everything that no longer mattered. Final line, I didn't rebuild the life he broke. I built the one I was never allowed to want. And this time, every inch of it is mine.